Okay, guys, welcome back to another episode of Rotten Reviews. On this episode, I take a look at the 1986 film Black Moon Rising, starring Tommy Lee Jones, Linda Hamilton, and Robert Vaughn. It has a 38% on the tomato meter and a 24% on the audience score. It's rotten. It deserves to be rotten. You know, as a teenager, I saw this film in 1986. I saw it, I believe, when it came out on HBO or Showtime, something on cable. And I remember thinking that, I was looking forward to a movie featuring that car, which in the film is called the Black Moon. And I thought it would be something akin to like Knight Rider, which was a cool thing at the time in the 80s. And I thought it would feature like Tommy Lee Jones kind of on a cross country adventure, either with this Black Moon car or trying to steal it or something along those lines. And I think that's the way the movie was marketed to people my age at the time. Now, when I saw this, and then I found out it was actually a story that all took place largely in a parking garage or two in Los Angeles, and it was very boring and dull and featured actually very little of that Black Moon car, despite it being in the title of the film, and despite it being on the artwork of the box cover that you can see right now on the screen in front of me. I was very disappointed, and I said, wow. I didn't use the word rotten because that wasn't a thing at the time, but I said, well, that was bad and it was stupid and it was boring, and it was. And in fact, the largest, worst, boring part of the movie was in fact a scene in which Tommy Lee Jones' character is beat up for a long stretch of time. He's beat up by a bunch of thugs in a parking garage at night, and it goes on and on and on, and there's no point to it. And despite that being something, a fight scene that you would think would be exciting, it wasn't. It was just boring, cheap, and pointless. And watching the main character just get beat up, that served no point in the story. Like a lot of stuff that didn't serve any purpose in the story. There were a lot of cheap action scenes. There was a scene in which a deaf character was actually run down by a car in the parking garage, and he's killed. And it's almost, that's the one laugh out loud part of the movie where he flies up in the air, because I guess they wanted to keep the PG rating of the movie. So instead of showing the car hitting this deaf character, they just showed him flying up in the air and the car driving past him, the way they cut back and forth between the car and him flying in the air. And it was so completely stupid. And even as a teenager at the time, I found it laugh out loud stupid, and I still do. And in fact, I watched this film for the first time in the last week since 1986. This is the first time I saw this film on streaming. And I had one laugh out loud funny moment, and that's when that deaf character flew up in the air because of how stupid it was. The rest of it was completely boring and just as bad as I remembered from 1986. It didn't get better over time, and it's not one of those films that's laugh out loud funny. I mean, it's so bad it's good. No, no, no. It was just that one part. And so, you know what? Another interesting thing in this film is that Robert Vaughn, he plays like a James Bond type villain, which is what he's known for. He's played that in other things. And he plays this James Bond-like villain whose whole purpose seems to be stealing cars and selling them to other criminals. It's completely stupid. He controls this gigantic office building in downtown Los Angeles, which is like under a continued state of construction for some purpose. Maybe it was an actual construction site that was featured in the film at the time. And it's like the city of Los Angeles and the cops and everybody else in the town that would be looking for stolen cars just doesn't notice this office building just being abandoned and being sitting there, being controlled by this nefarious Bond villain that's stealing all the cars in the city. It's completely stupid, completely stupid. That nothing about this works. And in fact, there's a lot of like high-tech props, like instrument panel props that are used in the lair of this Bond-like villain that are just straight up ripped off from the Knight Rider TV show. You can tell they were taken from Knight Rider. And again, it's not just like this movie was marketed to people as a Knight Rider type thing, but they actually stole props from it. completely bad and stupid. And I recognize actually the parking garage location where a lot of the film takes place. It's the same exact parking garage location featured in the first Terminator movie, also starring Linda Hamilton. And I can even pinpoint the scene in which Linda Hamilton's character and Michael Biehn's character, they're speeding away from the Terminator in a an old 1970s Cadillac, like an Eldorado, and they end up crashing it into a wall at the end. That's the exact place where this movie is filmed, and it's a parking garage that's supposedly, in the movie, it's underneath this bad guy's skyscraper lair. It's the exact same set, and it's just like this is the whole set of this movie is taking place in this parking garage area. Really bad and cheap. And the first part of this movie that stood out to me as making this a bad film is not just Tommy Lee Jones stealing these computer tapes from this nameless corporation, and this ridiculously named corporation in Nevada called Lucky Strike or something like that. It's some kind of computer corporation in Nevada. Lucky Strike is the name of it. And I'm trying not to laugh. The worst part of this movie, when I knew this movie was going to be bad, is when they show Tommy Lee Jones escaping into the desert, like driving away from the bad guys in a Jeep Cherokee. And he's driving off into the desert, and then the bad guys follow him off into the desert across this field. And then it just cuts right from that to Tommy Lee Jones sitting in a bar and meeting with a secret agent from the government. And no explanation how he escaped from the bad guys or what happened in that field. That was the first clue that this thing was really bad, and it doesn't get any better from there. Now let's go right into the audience reviews and see what people think about this. It's interesting. The most recent review of this is from August of 2016. So apparently people, even though this isn't on streaming, people are not bothering to watch this and make any kind of comment on it. But I think I did see this on Amazon Prime streaming, a week ago. But let's get right to it. August of 2016. 3 stars. Most of the reviews seem a little harsh in my opinion, considering this movie was made 30 years ago. No, it doesn't matter if it was made 30 years ago. The first Superman movie was made in 1978, more than 30 years ago, and it's still a great movie, so I completely disavow the logic of this review. And if I had to put a star rating on this, I would say that I give this like half a star, because a movie was made and people got paid, and somehow this didn't derail Tommy Lee Jones' career. I don't know how it didn't derail it, but it didn't. He somehow survived this, despite this being one of the worst movies I've ever seen him participate in. Let's move on. 2.5 stars. I wasn't really impressed by this cliched story of a master thief, his plot to steal a fantastic automobile from an impenetrable fortress with the aid of the most inept pair of auto designers and Linda Hamilton at her 1980s hair worst. Every now and then there's a good stunt. That review is not doing a favor to this movie, but it's actually not telling you how bad it is. There's no fantastic automobile to be featured. The Dark Moon car that's in the title of this movie, it's a complete bait and switch. There's very little of this car featured. You do see Linda Hamilton kind of driving it, stealing it away to the bad guy's lair, and it looks completely comical the way she drives it and the way it's filmed. It's really cheap and stupid, and it's obvious that the car is a really cheaply clad kit car of some kind that they slapped over, who knows, maybe a Pontiac Fiero, something like that. There's no impenetrable fortress. It's just a downtown LA office building under construction, and most of it's shot in the parking garage of this under construction building. Auto designers, yeah, the inept auto designers are actually meeting with the creators of this Black Moon car in a bar in downtown Los Angeles somewhere. It's completely ridiculous. And the other part of the ridiculousness is that this supposed head of an American automobile company that's being courted by the designer of the Black Moon car, He's actually got a German accent, and his henchmen or his other executives are German too. Why would a German guy be running an American car company? It's completely ridiculous. It's as ridiculous as the rest of the movie. It's worse than a comic book. It's really bad. 3.5 stars. Black Moon Rising is surprisingly well written and acted by Jones, Hamilton, and Vaughn. I'm not sure what movie you're watching, but I'll continue. For being a bit of an 80s wash, it holds up pretty nicely despite its dated effects. From the beginning of the film, Jones enter a convenience store, and from that moment he steals the show. A young kid walks looking to rob the place, to which Jones warns him an understated way not to give up his life. This moment indicates to us that this is more than a routine caper picture. I'm sorry, they're kind of describing one scene from this movie. At the very beginning of this movie, before Tommy Lee Jones actually steals these computer tapes from this weird corporation in Nevada, he stops by a convenience store for a coffee or something like that. And in the process, a young teenager comes in to rob the 7-Eleven. And Jones does a cliched speech to him to get him to run away. Despite him having the gun and robbing the place, he just is so affected by Tommy Lee Jones' cliched little speech about not ruining his life that he bolts out of the 7-Eleven not to be seen again. It's completely stupid and doesn't fit in with anything in the rest of the movie. I guess it's trying to say that Tommy Lee Jones' character is not just an irredeemable thief or a spy, thief for hire or whatever. He's some kind of do-gooder too, but he's not a do-gooder. He's just like a nonsensical thief that's employed by some shadowy government agency that's implied to be the FBI. It's really bizarre. Nothing about this adds up to anything or makes sense. At one point in the movie, Tommy Lee Jones needs to get blueprints to the bad guy's office building lair, and he visits a dying old man in a hospital bed, played by a rather well-known actor from the 70s and 80s, who I can't recall his name at the time. He's more of a character actor of that time period. And he's like some kind of master thief source for blueprints, and he's on an oxygen line, and he rolls out some blueprints from somewhere that show the detailed plans of this bad guy's lair. Like, it's not explained how he has the plans or whatnot. It's completely ridiculous. I don't know how to describe it better than that, other than it's just one more ridiculous thing in this movie. And this movie's very long. It's very long and drawn out. And as a teenager, I was hoping it would go somewhere and I would get some exciting car action with this Black Moon vehicle or some other cars, because there are a lot of stolen cars being rolled around in this parking garage. But you don't get any of that. It's completely dumb and pointless, and it's just a snooze fest all the way through. And then the end of this movie, it shows the cops rolling up on the scene at the end of this movie to bust the bad guy in his lair. Why didn't anybody just call the cops at the beginning of this movie? But nobody ever does. They go through all these convoluted things. Even the designers of this Black Moon car that are kind of side characters that are just hunting their stolen car, that cross paths with Tommy Lee Jones, they don't try to call the police or anything like that when they know where the car is. They also just go along with this harebrained convoluted scheme of Tommy Lee Jones's to break in and steal the car back. Why didn't they just call the police? Why didn't anybody call the police? You don't think the police are interested in knowing where all the stolen cars are in the city? Come on, this is just pathetically stupid. So anyway, let's move on. January of 2016, 2 stars. This decent action movie stars Tommy Lee Jones and Linda Hamilton in all her 80s splendor as car thieves stealing an experimental supercar. Again, the experimental supercar features very little in this. It's really dumb. It's just like a side plot in this, and you barely get to see anything with it at all. It's supposedly a supercar that can go 300 miles an hour and it runs on water. That's great. That sounds like a cool movie. That's the way this was marketed, but that's very little of this film. It's just like a throwaway side plot to this film. It really is, and it's just boring. 3 stars, April 28th, 2015. We're quite back in time, showing that this movie may not be so relevant. 3 stars. What? I'd never see this movie. I thought Furious 7 was the movie to jump a car between 2 buildings. This movie's plot holes, dialogue, and bad acting are redeemed by sheer 80s crazy hilarity. Yeah, it features, like a lot of movies and video games feature a scene in which a car jumps between two skyscrapers. This is not new. I don't even think this was new back in 1986. It's a very tiny, tiny portion of this movie that you'll easily skip. It's a very few seconds in this movie of the only action in this movie, really. So it's completely forgettable. But yeah, the Black Moon jumps between two towers of the skyscraper fortress. Very small point of this. It doesn't mean anything really. Um, this movie's plot holes, dialogue, and bad acting are redeemed. No, it's not redeemed in any way. It's completely stupid. Another stupid thing in this movie is how there's a romance between Tommy Lee Jones and Linda Hamilton. You know what consists of the romance? You know how the romance starts off? Tommy Lee Jones drives up to a bar where he's stalking Linda Hamilton inside. He just kind of like parks his car in front of her. She's coming out of this nightclub, this bar nightclub thing, and because he's blocking her with his car, she just is compelled to get in his car, go home, and sleep with him in her place. No explanation how that happens. I guess that's a great way to pick up girls at the club. You just kind of block their exit with your car at the curb, and then they take you back to their place and have sex with you, and they're in love with you now. It's fantastic. It's fantastic movie logic. And no, that's not common movie logic of the 1980s. That's why I'm surprised that this film didn't derail Tommy Lee Jones because of how stupid this was, and he participated in this whole thing like it was serious in some way. But let's move on. 2.5 stars. I can't believe that John Carpenter wrote this absurd movie. It's not cheesy enough to be entertaining and definitely not a serious film. Black Moon Rising is just another mediocre 80s schlock fest. This one is only for hardcore John Carpenter fans. Yeah, it's hard to even believe he wrote it, but yes, he's actually listed as the writer of this. But there's nothing about this that would suggest it's a John Carpenter flick. Nothing about it at all. It's certainly not horror. There's nothing weird and campy to it. It's just stupid and boring. John Carpenter, there's nothing even in the music that would suggest John Carpenter had something to do with this. So it's just like maybe he was involved in just enough legally to be called, to be listed by union rules as having a writing credit on this, because it's just like you would never associate this with John Carpenter. And yes, John Carpenter's known for some hella bad movies, Rotten, certainly Rotten, and I've talked about those, but there's nothing about this movie that suggests he was involved to me, so it's like, I'm suggesting that he's just barely legally able to get his name as a writing credit on this. I would not consider this a John Carpenter movie. 3 stars. Dumb 80s action flick is only of note because it stars Tommy Lee Jones in a role that seemed more befitting of Chuck Norris or Lorenzo Lamas. Not Chuck Norris, but Lorenzo Lamas, yes. Pointless fight scenes, long and drawn out, but you know, in this case, Tommy Lee Jones, his big fight scene that's really long and boring, it's not really a fight scene, it's just him getting beat up by some thugs, beat up so badly that he should have been in the hospital for a couple of weeks. But no, he's beat up in such a horrendous fashion, and then he just kind of struggles back to Linda Hamilton's apartment and soaks in her tub, and everything's fine after that. It's completely ridiculous. He doesn't beat up anybody, he just gets the hell beat out of him, and then he's just fine after a hot bath and no problem. He'll be back into the action in just a couple of hours of movie time in the world. Yeah, really bad. However, the script is based on a story from John Carpenter. I'm curious what his original version was like, and the film features a stronger cast than his lame brain production deserved, which includes Linda Hamilton, Robert Vaughn, Richard Jackal, Lee Ving, Bubba Smith. Yeah, Bubba Smith plays the mysterious FBI agent that shows up at the bar and a bathroom and some other place to secretly meet up with Tommy Lee Jones. He wants Tommy Lee Jones to get these computer tapes that he's hidden in the back of the Black Moon vehicle. It's completely weird. Bubba Smith, yeah, he's just a giant guy in a suit. He's this mysterious FBI agent whose only, main thing in the movie is to punch Tommy Lee Jones in the stomach one time to keep him in line. Yeah, that's how the FBI deals with people. They just punch them in the stomach once to keep them walking the line, doing what they're supposed to be doing. It's completely ridiculous. Let's move on. 3 stars from April of 2014, working for the U.S. government to retrieve a cassette with incriminating evidence from a suspicious company. Sam Quint, Tommy Lee Jones, a former CIA agent and professional thief, runs into Marvin Ringer Lee Ving, another hitman he replaced, who is after the same cassette. In a desperate attempt to evade Ringer and get the tape back to the government, official Johnson, Bubba Smith, Quint hides the cassette in a 300-mile-per-hour prototype vehicle, the Black Moon. This reviewer has written this like rather wordy synopsis, and it's like making this movie sound like it is something a whole lot more than it really is. Yes, you can get all this. There's nothing technically in error about this plot synopsis, but it's just worded in a way, it's like you're trying to spin gold out of pure shit. I mean, wow. It's just hard to believe. 3 stars, no, try half a star. 4 stars, December of 2013. Fun, rousing thriller from the pen of John Carpenter. I loved watching this through the 80s goggles, back when Tommy Lee Jones had hair and Robert Vaughn always played the villain. Well, Tommy Lee Jones kind of has a mullet, like an 80s mullet type hair, and that's probably his real hair, but this should have derailed his career. It's just so corny and stupid and boring. There's nothing 80s nostalgic about this. It's just bad movie nostalgic. It's just bad in every way. 3 stars from October 2013. When Master Thief Sam Quint is hired by the government to steal top secret data from a crime organization, he hides the stolen data in the experimental supercar, the Black Moon. But when the car is stolen by high-tech auto thief Nina, Quint must pull off the most daring heist of all, break into an impenetrable skyscraper and steal it back. With time running out and all sides closing in, Quint and Nina take the Black Moon on one final ride towards a shattering climax. Wow, this guy actually did a better job than the previous reviewer of making this movie seem like it's something a whole lot more than it really is. They should have been employed back in the 80s to write the actual marketing for this movie. They would have had quite a career back in the day. This seems like somebody that just missed their calling. They weren't born in the right decade. But this movie is not all that. It is completely horrific. It is half a star. And, you know, when they say this is an impenetrable skyscraper, the only thing impenetrable about this downtown office building in LA is that in the parking garage, there's just a gigantic concrete wall that looks like any other concrete wall of a parking garage that's underneath the skyscraper. And it's impenetrable only in that it's on a gigantic swivel hinge that can be remote controlled by a button push by the James Bond-like character that's stealing cars. And, you know, it's not impenetrable. It's just got a fake wall in the parking garage. And you spend most of your time in this movie either looking at that wall or looking at that parking garage. And there's some scenes of the empty floors inside the skyscraper where the villain has a desk set up in an otherwise empty skyscraper. It's so damn cheap. It's just like they took a skyscraper under construction in Los Angeles and set the movie there. And mostly it's in the parking garage. I'm sorry. Wow. 1 star. Some 80s flicks need to be left back in the 80s. Was still funny to watch just for the cheesy 80s style. It's almost like Linda Hamilton was desperate for her next role, and you know she was in 2 other things that are even more forgotten than this between The Terminator and this movie. But it's like she was still desperate at the time. She hadn't yet married James Cameron, so she still needed work. And Tommy Lee Jones, I don't know how he survived this. It's so bad. 3 stars. Tommy Lee Jones rises to the occasion. Good 80s supercar auction. I think they mean supercar action. No, stick to Knight Rider. This is like just enough supercar in here to like put a trailer together that would kind of get Knight Rider fanboys into this, and that's what it did back in the 80s, as I was tricked as a teenager too. There's very little Knight Rider in this, I'm afraid. 3.5 stars, 78%. I need that funny looking car. Sam Quint, I just have one question. Is it possible to get blue balls on top of blue balls? Yeah, they're referring to the same thing. It promises you this Knight Rider action movie and you don't get anything. Nothing. You get like this cheesy Knight Rider knockoff car that's just barely a side plot. It doesn't even characterize or rise to the occasion of being a proper side plot. It's just barely in this thing. 3 stars were in November of 2012. Tommy Lee Jones is good here, but I left bored. I left bored as the film went on. A near miss. It's not a near miss. It's a total miss. And yeah, they're right. It's completely boring. Five, no, 4.5 stars. Great action flick. It's a lot of fun. Sorry, I don't believe you. 2.5 stars. The script is by John Carpenter, but this film was directed by some guy called Harley Cokeless. Perhaps that's why it gets a lower rate. Harley Cokeless. Cokeless, he should have done Coke. Maybe it would have improved his script. Half a star. We're in March of 2012. 4 stars. I don't care. I really enjoyed two very lovable leads in a very thin sci-fi noir. Okay. 3 stars. I liked it. It was kind of cool with a cool soundtrack. No, it wasn't. 2.5 stars. Average movie on pseudo-futuristic technology with some action. Forgettable. The only pseudo-futuristic technology was the stuff they stole from Knight Rider, like the instrument panels and stuff that they did clearly steal from Knight Rider. Otherwise, sorry. Forgettable is the word. That is correct. 2.5 stars. December of 2011. Even if it was co-written by John Carpenter, Black Moon Rising is very hit and miss. Maybe if he directed it, could have been better. That's not saying that it's a total loss. The cast is good here with Tommy Lee Jones in an actual likable performance. Linda Hamilton does what she does best by getting on top during the sex scene. Robert Vaughn always makes for a grand villain. Bubba Smith is a cool motherfucker, and I'm always glad when William Sanderson shows up. This is one of those movies, well, let's just stop right there and let me just pull one nugget out of this review. Yes, Linda Hamilton performed the same sex scene she did in the Terminator movie. It's almost like they took unused footage out of the Terminator movie. She's riding the hero just like she did in Terminator. And it's the same exact performance. I mean, literally, it's the same. I don't know if it was, in fact, she just didn't know how to do anything else in a sex scene, or the director actually told her to do her same sex scene from the Terminator, but she did, and it's exactly the same. The exact same cliched sex scene, shot the same way. It's a blast from the past, but, you know, the worst part of the Terminator movie, in my opinion. October of 2011, 5 stars. The top action flick of 1986, history in the making. No, I think that would go probably to Top Gun or many other films from 1986. I'm sorry, I don't believe you. Or also look up the movie Cobra with Stallone. If you want to see cheesy goodness from 1986, Cobra is where you go. I think you can find that for free out there. Just look a little bit harder than you obviously are. September of 2011, 3 stars. Written by John Carpenter, Rising is a fun and sadly overlooked 80s action thriller starring Tommy Lee Jones and Linda Hamilton. Jones plays a professional thief who's forced to hide a stolen cassette in a prototype for a revolutionary new car, the Black Moon. When Hamilton's car thief steals the prototype, Jones needs to get it back before his employers terminate his employment permanently. Yeah, he might get his stomach punched by Bubba Smith again. Rising has a good veteran supporting cast and takes itself serious when it needs to. They're just trying to really talk this movie up back in 2011. Again, the only part of the story we get in which Tommy Lee Jones is being told what to do by some boss is Bubba Smith's character, who shows up and punches him in the sucker punches him into the stomach to teach him to stay in line and to get those tapes back because he's taking too long to get those tapes back. It's comical. You know, it might be the one point you might laugh if you were drunk, but otherwise it's completely stupid. I mean, think about it. The bad guy, or the good guys, the hero's real motivation of this to get these stolen computer tapes back is because he's afraid Bubba Smith will punch him in the stomach again. Yeah, wow, it's so fantastic. 3 stars, August of 2011. This was a fairly decent film starring Tommy Lee Jones and Linda Hamilton. Tommy Lee Jones is a thief who is hired to steal a data tape. He hides it in a high-tech car. Again, more synopsis. They then team up to steal the car back from Vaughn, and of course there are explosions, car chases, shootouts, and lots of action. I don't know what movie you're watching, but that didn't take place in this movie. There was a lot of people talking about all these things, but not any of those things. Written by John Carpenter and directed by Harley Coklis. Yeah, and the only action you got from a car was there was a scene in a parking garage in which, for some weird absence of logic, the villain of the movie decides to run down this deaf guy in the parking garage with a car, and that's really shot in a ridiculous, cheap way. And yeah, nobody bothers to call the police. When you run somebody down in a parking garage, somebody that you've stolen their high-tech car and they know it's in your building somewhere, and you go out and you run them down in the parking garage, you run one of their guys down, and what's the logic there? You just know they won't call the police for some reason. And where, this giant garbage truck comes along and just conveniently scoops up the dead body of the guy that got run down in the parking garage, and then we never hear about that guy again, or what happened to his body, or why the police weren't called, and who was driving the garbage truck. And wow, wow, wow. It would have worked in a parody, but there's nothing funny about this. It's just like there's this illogical stuff thrown in from time to time in the movie that would have worked in a parody and would have been funny, but it's just not a parody. This is supposed to be a serious action movie. How did Tommy Lee Jones survive this? I don't know. 3 stars. Somewhat silly actioner here as Tommy Lee Jones in all his mid-80s glory goes against Linda Hamilton and yes, Robert Vaughn to retrieve a tape he stored in a vehicle from the future. No, not really. It's just a vehicle, a test vehicle, not a vehicle from the future. Actually, the vehicle is a mighty fast car, and Jones stored that tape in there so that the other bad guys don't find it while punching Jones silly. Meanwhile, Hamilton looks all pouty and mean in her high hair while trying to take orders from her mean boss. Yeah, everybody's got orders from mean bosses that they're just somehow forced to take, and they're supposed to be, like, even the henchmen are just doing what they have to do because the plot requires it. There's no actual logic to their motivation, or it's completely surface level bad stuff. Even as a teenager, I considered this completely laughably stupid, and I was probably 15 at the time I saw this. Really bad. 3 stars from March of 2011. Thieves converge on a prototype car carrying a vital tape. Tommy Lee and Jackal always something, plus a screenplay by John Carpenter. Maybe the biggest mistake was having this amazing car parked in a warehouse most of the film. Yeah, it's parked in a parking garage under a building most of the film. It's not even in the film enough to be a side plot. It's completely just there to trick you in the trailer into thinking you're going to see an action movie that's similar to Knight Rider in some way. But let me clue you in. Tommy Lee Jones completely fails as Michael Knight in Knight Rider. That would be funny to see, but he fails pretty hard. And he wears a leather jacket in this film too, and kind of dresses like Michael Knight from Knight Rider. He didn't have the big hair like that, but it's like Tommy Lee Jones in a very bad rendition of Michael Knight from Knight Rider. Again, all constructed not for the sake of the movie, but for the sake of the trailer, to get teenagers to go into the theater, to pay their money, to get their butts in the seats. And I'm glad I wasn't in the theater when I saw it. I got to see it on HBO or some such in 1986. 3 stars, January of 2011. Enjoyable 80s espionage action thriller about a supercar, very unlike KITT from Knight Rider. Yeah, but they wanted you to think it was like that, didn't they? That can hit speeds over 300 miles per hour, which is nabbed by a company led by Robert Vaughn. Tommy Lee Jones' character wants the car back as he's placed a sensitive data tape that he stole inside it. While it's not great cinema, it is great fun. No, it's not. The action is top-notch, and the characters are appealing. The relationship between Tommy Lee Jones and Linda Hamilton is surprising, well-balanced. Oh, it's surprising, all right. You pull up outside a bar, and you block a girl exiting with your car, and suddenly you're back at her place, making sweet love to her. Yeah, that's very surprising because I never had that happen to me when I was out at clubs. Why didn't I try that? Probably because I didn't want to end up in jail at the end of the night. But anyway, 2.5 stars, October of 2010, a watchable 80s thriller in which Tommy Lee Jones brings top-notch acting. Oh yeah, sure he does. 1.5 star, okay, but you can tell why it only cost $1 million or 1 million pounds. I can't quite make out which one they're trying to say here. Some good parts, but overall a bad film. Yeah, I would think that this was the cheapest way they could do this. They literally set almost all of the movie was set inside a parking garage in Los Angeles, and there were just a couple small short scenes that were set at a gas station on the edge of the desert outside of Los Angeles. In fact, it's most likely the same exact gas station in the desert that was featured at the end of the first Terminator movie, and I would be willing to bet it's that exact same gas station, right? Um, I don't know that for a fact, but I'd be willing to guess that it is. I mean, they already recycled the parking garage from Terminator. Why not recycle that gas station? It's probably the same gas station that Linda Hamilton pulls up in her Jeep, and I think she's driving a Wrangler, and she, makes that comment into the tape recorder about, how there's a storm coming. It's the classic end of the Terminator film, and it's that same gas station that part of this movie set at. I'm pretty sure of that. 1.5 stars, July of 2010. Not English, but we'll leave it on that. This is Black Moon Rising, 38% on the tomato meter. I don't know how this gets so high on the tomato meter, why the critics somehow like this enough. It should be about 12% on the tomato meter. But in any case, 24% on the audience score. I think that's fair. If it dropped to 10%, it would still be fair. This is completely forgettable, and obviously by the, how quickly we jumped back in time on a couple of pages on Rotten Tomatoes, that this is largely a forgotten about film. It's not going to be a cult classic. It's not quite funny enough to laugh out loud at. Maybe there's one part that is. The rest of it is just completely cheap, boring nonsense, completely illogical, and so I will leave you until the next episode of Rotten Reviews.